Hello everyone, this is Neil from Edureka and welcome to this Edureka session on Python OOPS. OOPS, which basically stands for Object-Oriented Programming System or Object-Oriented Programming as it's most popularly known, is one of the most popular programming paradigm. Now, although Python is not completely an object-oriented programming language, but still it uses major concepts of object-oriented programming style as part of this. Now in this session what we'll majorly be talking about are classes and objects, classes in Python and object-oriented concepts in Python as well. Now let's first start about classes and objects. Now to those of you who are not familiar with the different programming paradigm, two of the most programming paradigm is object-oriented programming and procedure-oriented programming. Now when you look at older programming languages like C, or you can see Visual Basic as well, these followed procedural-oriented programming language style, wherein what used to happen was that the entire program was divided into smaller parts known as functions, and the importance was not given to the data but the sequence of actions which were performed. Also, what used to happen there was that the entire process took a top-down approach as such. But what happened is when newer programming languages came up, they realized the value of the data and they came up with the opportunity of creating something known as objects. Now objects are quite similar to what you can relate to in real-world entity as well. Now anything that we see around, anything that has different properties can be called as an object. And here how it differs from the older style, that is the procedure oriented programming style, is that it goes from a bottom up approach, as well as there's more data security as well, and you can use various operations like data accessing, data overloading, data expansion and so forth. Now some of the examples of object oriented programming languages is C#, Java, Visual Basic.NET and so forth. Now let's first address the question of what exactly is a class and object. Now to help you understand this better, let's actually look at an example here. Now to give you a simple one-line definition, a class basically is a logical grouping which helps us reuse and rebuild our data as part of the code. Now to put it quite simply, it basically is similar to a template or a blueprint that we use. Once I have defined a specific requirement of mine, then what I can do is that I can go on variating with respect to that. Now let's look at the example here. Now if you look here, I have created a class called employees, wherein I have defined some of the most common parameter each of my employees will be having. There would be his name, there would be their age, and there would be their salary. Now I have defined a blueprint, but there comes a time where I need to implement this. So an instance, which is basically a entity of the class, is referred to as an object here. Now if you look here, there are basically three different objects. I have object 1, which is referring to Sarah, whose age is 37 as well as salary is 10,000. My object 2 is John, whose age is 43 and salary is 21,000. Similarly is Jessica as well, whose age is 26 and the salary is 24,000. Now how does Python implement classes? Now again, to go back to the definition, a class basically is a blueprint for which objects are created. Now coming to the basic syntax for how to write a class in Python, it's quite easy because you just need to define the keyword class, following which you need to specify the name of the class. Now let's go, if you take the previous example, the name of that class would be employees and each of the objects would be created from that same class. Now what I'm going to be writing inside the class would be three major aspects. I would have my class variables, I would have instance variables, and I would have data members. Okay, now these are the three major aspects to any class as such. Now if I need a variable which is going to be shared by all the instances of the class. Now do not get confused when I say instance, it basically is referring to a object itself. So here we refer to an object as instance. Now if I want each of the instance to share a common variable, then I would make it a class variable. But let's say I want each of the instances to have a specific variable. Okay, then I would be using an instance variable as such. Then comes the third part, which basically is your data member. a this basically is a class variable or an instance variable as such that actually holds the data associated with respect to the class and objects. Now, without confusing you any further, let me actually switch to my PyCharm, okay, and let me show you this by defining a class here itself. Okay, so let's start by creating a simple class here. Now, let me use the first keyword for defining any class, that is class. Then comes name of the class. Now, for today's example, what I'll do is I'll create a class called cars. Okay, so I've created a class called cars. Okay, can you guys see this? Okay. And here what I'm going to do is that right now I'm not going to write anything. So I'm just going to use the keyword pass. Then comes the time for me to create objects for this class. So what I'll do is let me call an object, let's take Honda for it. Okay, so this is the name of my object, and then I'm going to specify to which class it belongs to. So it belongs to the class car, and this is how you create an object in Python. Quite easy, right? Similarly, let me create another one. Let me call it Tata. Okay, Tata is also going to be of car. Okay, so basically what I've done here is that I've created two objects that belong to a specific class. Now comes the time when you actually assign values to these instances or objects as such. Now, let's say I want to add the name or the model number for the Honda car. So I'm going to say Honda, which is my object, following which use a dot operator and then specify what instance variable you want to use. Now, let's say I want to specify model name. Okay, model name is equal to, I'd say, city, because I like Honda City. Okay, now I'll also add another variable which is year of manufacture. So I'll say year M, okay, and this basically is going to be equal to, let's say, 2017. Now I'll also add price. Okay, I'd say about 10 lakhs. Does that sound fine? Now let me just copy the same and let me create an object for Tata car as well. Now here let me just change it to Tata. And let's say this is bold. Okay, so let's keep the year the same, or let me reduce it to 2016, and let's say the price is, let me reduce it, I'll make it 6. Okay, does that sound fine? Now what I have done here is that I have created instances of the class or objects to that class, and each of these instances themselves have a specific variable assigned to them as well. So in this case, what you see here is the model name, what you see is the year, and what you see is the price. So these are basically variables associated to each of these instances as well. Now if I say just print and I say Honda dot model name. Okay, let me take the price itself. Let's try running this. You see the mistake here? Can anyone guess what's the mistake here with respect to the code? Okay, it's with respect to the definition of the class. Now if we go back to our slides here, Can you see there's a small semicolon here that we have missed out? So this is how it is. A single semicolon can make a lot of difference. Okay. Now let's just save this. Let's run it. Okay, I can see the price of my Honda car here. Now, this is a lot of pain for me when I'm working with multiple instances which have unique variables to them. But let's say if I have common values that needs to be created for all of these. If I was using other programming languages, we had a concept known as constructors. But don't worry, that same is present here as well with Python. So to create a constructor, use the following command, which is def, which is basically defining a function, and use init. Now init is basically a constructor here, and what it is representing is that it is going to initialize the value of the variables. Now if you notice here, there's a keyword that is already added here, that is self. Self basically is a reference to the object which is going to be calling this function. Now those of you who are not familiar with functions can check out our video on Python tutorials where we have talked about functions, and also check out our Python function video as well. Okay, now what happens is, to this let me pass a model name. I'll also pass the year manufacture, and let's say the price as well. Okay, now I need to assign the values for these variables for all the object. Now if I need to do that, then what I need to do is that I need to first reference the object. So that's self dot model name equal to the model name that it's getting. So then self dot year of manufacturing, and finally self dot price. Okay, now what I'm basically doing is that for my constructor, I would be passing these three parameters. So for the object or the instance which is going to be created, please add these values for that. Okay, now let me show you how to change this as well. Now I don't need this, so I'll remove all this. Okay, so here what I'll do is I'll pass Honda, I'll pass city. Okay, I'll also pass the year of manufacturing is 2017, and let me pass the price again. Same for Tata. So what I've basically done is that I have generalized the requirement that I want. Now again, if I run the same, what you can see here is I'm getting the same output that I had gotten earlier as well. So this basically is a constructor that is going to be used when I have to assign specific values to my objects or instances at the time that they are creating. Apart from this, if you want to create or you want to add any specific value, you're free to do that. Now let's say I want to add a new value. Let's say I want to create Honda dot, let's say I want to add the CC as well, the CC of Honda City, which is equal to 1500. Okay, so this is also very simple. Now what happens here is that I've created an instance variable for the Honda object. Okay, now same thing, let me just say, if I want to see the complete values that are associated to an object, then what do I do is that I check the namespace for it. Now how do I check the namespace for it is that I use the dictionary option. I use the dictionary function. Okay, so if I use dict function and if I run this, then what you see here is that I have a model name which is city, I have a year of manufacturing 2017, I have a price, and I have the CC associated to it as well. Okay, now what basically it tells me is if I use this object and request any of these values, then this is the output that I would be getting. Same if I change for Tata. and I run this, then what you see here is that CC is not present. So I hope you understand the difference between both. Now, if I have a class, then if I don't perform any operations in it, then I'm basically not optimizing or using the complete capability of that class as well. Now, what I'll be doing is that I'll be creating a function here. So this function, what it basically does is that it's going to increase the price of my car. So what I'm going to do is that for defining any function, use the keyword def, okay, following which the name of the function. So let's say price underscore increase. Okay, now this is a function, but it's going to be performing on itself as well. So use self here, okay, and I'm going to start defining this function. What do I need to do is that I basically just need to update the value of price. Okay, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use self dot price equal to, then I'm going to do a simple computation. Let's say the present self dot price, sorry about the typo, into, okay, how much do you think the annual price range would be? Let's take a guess. Let's maybe a 15% rise. In that case, I'll go with 1.15. Okay. Now I have defined a function here, but what you need to understand is that it's not exactly in the scope of the class. So oh, sorry about that. Now, how do you identify if it's in scope or not? It's basically one of the eases with respect to PyCharm. If I expand it, then I know what is part of the class and what is not. So this is one of the major reasons that we recommend you use PyCharm as an IDE as such. Okay, now I need to increase the price. So what I'll do is, let me go back. Let's say I want to check the price of the Honda first. Okay, then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to call the function with respect to the class. Now it's defined to that class. So what I'll do is that I'll send this function. I'll use the Honda object to call that function. Now to use any of the functions associated to a class, make sure you're using the instance or object of that class. So Honda dot, now you can already see here the different suggestions that comes to it. Now price increase is the function that I want. Okay, and again let me copy this and paste it. Okay, so again, see, the major issue here is it's considering this. So if you just double indent it, it's going to set back. Okay, just save this and let me rerun this. Okay, now it's giving me the output. So it's converting it. Let me just add int here just to convert it to integer type. Okay, so the output should be converted to integer type for me. So it's incremented the value to 1.15 times. Okay, so these are basic function operations that you can perform with respect to Python. Now let me go back to my presentation, and here let's talk about the various object-oriented concepts in Python. Now in this session, what we'll be talking about are the three major concepts, which is inheritance, encapsulation, and abstraction. Now when we come down to inheritance, inheritance basically is the ability or the opportunity for any class to inherit the attributes and behaviors from the parent class. Now when I talk about a parent class, it refers to a superclass as such. Okay, so let's take cars itself for an example, but before that let's look at the example here. Now your parent becomes a base class and son becomes the derived class as such. This is same that we'll be implementing in our program as well. So in our PyCharm, what I'll do is that I'm going to create a new class, and let me call it supercar. But if it has to inherit it the properties that are present in the car class, then what I need to do is that I need to specify car here. Okay, that means it becomes the parent for the supercars. Okay, so here I'm not going to define anything, I'm just going to say pass, and let me remove this from here and let me add it here. Okay, now rather than making Honda as an instance of car class, let me make it of the supercar class. Okay, now I have not defined an init operation, or nor have I initiated the values for these variables as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is that let me just try running this. Okay, let me remove this. Okay, and let me just print the namespace for Honda, which is Honda dot wait, before that, let me just show you. Let me just print one of the values itself first before I show you the namespace completely. Let's say Honda dot year. Okay, so year of manufacturing is defined here. I have not explicitly defined in the child class, but let me make sure. Let me just run this and let's see the output. Okay, so here basically it's just passing it. Spelling mistake. Let's rerun this. Now here what is happening is that it is referencing to its parent. Okay, now to get a better understanding of what exactly is happening here, okay, we're going to use something interesting. What we're basically going to do is that we're going to use the help function. Print help, and here what I'm going to do is that I'm going to pass Honda. Let me just comment this. Now this is something that I really want to show you guys. Okay, now if you see here, what is happening is that it's showing me the method resolution order. So basically it's showing me how it is going to follow the sequence of operations. First it is going to check in supercar for init method, but I have not defined it here. So what it's going to do is that it's going to refer the car class. If it is not defined there as well, then it will go back to the parent class for all objects, which is built-in dot objects. This is the parent class that is going to be inherited by all the classes used in this language as such. So it's found the init method present in cars, okay, and it's shown methods inherited from class is the init method, and it has initialized itself. Okay, now this is basically the sequence of operations that happen as well. Now when I define any function with respect to the child class, it's going to check the child class. If it is not present, then it's going to check the parent class as such. Now it can be anything as such. It can also be the price increase as well. And okay, okay, let me just comment this section out. So here again it has inherited this method as well. Now let's say if you do want to define an init method as part of the class, then what you basically do is that you follow the same sequence. You write define, okay, following which you use init, Then you specify the parameters it has to take. Okay, and then what you basically do is that you shouldn't actually copy this entire code and replace it here. What you can do is that you can use the keyword super dot init. Okay, so what I'm referring to is that it should call the init function present in the super class. Okay, in that case what I'm going to do is that I need to pass the parameters here as well. So I'm going to pass the model name, I'm going to pass the year of manufacturing, as well as I'm going to pass the price as well. Now this is basically to reduce the code that you're going to be writing as such. Now apart from this, let's say there are a few other variables that you're going to be taking. Let's say I'm going to include cc as part of my superclass. Then what I can do is that I can write here self dot cc is equal to cc. So I'm basically building on what is already present, and this is one of the major aspects that you can use inheritance for. This in turn reduces a lot of code dependency as well, and is one of the most popular and major factor for any programming language that uses object-oriented programming systems. Okay, now coming back to the next concept that is associated to Python, okay, you have encapsulation. Now encapsulation basically is the method through which you bind your data and your code together. Now it also helps you in hiding your data from people whom you don't want to do it, don't want to give visibility to. So this is one of the major key factors for any programming language as such. Now there are two major ways through which you can access or achieve encapsulation. One is by using the getter and setter method, and the next is by using @project. Okay, now we'll be talking more about that in our next session, but let me give you a simple understanding. What happens is that you want to change a specific value as on when in the Go itself. Let's say my year of development or my model year just keeps changing continuously. In that case, what I need to do is that I need to update these values on regular interval. But let's say if there's a specific dependency on these variables ahead as well, then it becomes an issue. Same can be said with respect to price. Now price is going to be increased continuously. Through getter setter method, I can ensure that this is going to be implemented every time there's going to be a change as well. Apart from that, one of the major concepts with respect to object-oriented programming is abstraction. Now, with respect to abstraction, what basically it means is that it hides the implementation details and only provides the functionalities to the user. Now, if you look at the image here, now a mechanical engineer or an automobile engineer who works with your car is aware of the inside and out of your car as well. Now, if I need to drive a car, I don't need to know that. I just need to know how to turn on my car, how to change the gears, and how to move forward as well. So that is what abstraction helps me achieve. I don't need to understand what exactly happens when a gear shifts from second to third, but I just need to know that a gear shift from second to third is going to make it easier for me to move ahead as well. Okay, so this can be achieved by using abstract classes, and an abstract class is quite similar to an actual class itself. But how is it different from an actual class is that an abstract class cannot have an object of itself. You need to inherit the abstract class, and you need to create an object of that abstract class as well. Now let me go back to the same example. Let's change it here. Okay, now what I'll do is that I'm going to add a few additional lines of code. Okay, let me just copy the here. Let's say I'm going to say from ABC and create abstract method. Okay, now what I'm going to say is that my car class ABC is also inheriting this abstract. Now I'm going to remove all this, and okay, here I'm going to make this an abstract method wherein I'm not going to define the logic here. Okay, for now what I'll just do is that I'll call it okay. And in my superclass, what I'll do is that I'm going to create the same function but here I'm not going to define any logic. Okay, so what I'm basically doing is that in my abstract class, I'm defining the method to increase the price, but based on my requirement. Now, let's say I don't want my supercars to have an increase of just 1.15. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to increase this. Let's say the annual increase is going to be 2%. So this is one of the major uses through which I can perform or I can use abstract classes. I can just define the basic logic which is needed to be implemented in all the classes going ahead, and then what I can do is that I can implement or variate these functions as per my requirement. Okay, now with this, let me go back to our slide and let me just summarize. So we started with classes and objects. We talked about classes in Python, and then we talked about the various object-oriented programming concepts in Python. Now, if in case you do have any questions, please put it across in the chat box. Thank you.